You can tell when the forest wants to keep a secret. It breathes differently. The air feels thicker, like it's holding its breath along with you. That's how it felt the night I found him. When the rain whispered warnings against my skin, and the moon refused to show her face. My name is Lyra Hale, and that night, I was supposed to be asleep. But the wolves were howling again. The villagers said it was a bad omen when the howls came from the northern ridge, where no living pack was supposed to remain. I told myself it was just the wind. I lied, because I'd been hearing it every night for 3 weeks, always near the same hour, always the same sound. Not a full-pack chorus, but one wolf, crying out like the world had turned its back on him. I don't know why I went. Maybe because I've always been drawn to broken things. Maybe because I was tired of pretending I didn't feel that same ache, the loneliness that claws at your ribs when the world falls silent. So I grabbed my lantern, my satchel of herbs, and stepped into the storm. The forest was a cathedral of shadows. Each tree was a pillar, black against black, the canopy groaning under the weight of the rain. The wind hissed through the branches, whispering my name, or maybe I just wanted to believe it did. My boots sank into the mud, every step loud in a world trying to stay quiet. Then I smelled it. Blood. Metallic, warm, wrong. The healer in me reacted before the human in me could run. I followed the scent through the thicket, my lantern flickering against leaves slick with rain. And that's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a dying wolf. Massive, black as the night itself, fur matted with mud and blood. But then, I saw the arrow lodged in his side, the way his chest still lifted in shallow, pained breaths. His eyes opened, gold, wild and lucid even in agony, and for a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. He didn't snarl, didn't move, just stared at me with a kind of exhausted fury, as if daring me to come closer. "I won't hurt you," I whispered, lowering my lantern. "Please let me help." He let out a low growl, weak but warning. I should have turned back, but I saw the tremor in his paws, the blood pooling beneath him. He wouldn't make it till dawn. And something deep inside me, something that wasn't reason, made me step forward anyway. I knelt beside him, rain dripping from my hair, hands trembling. "You're going to die if I don't pull that arrow out," I murmured. "And I don't plan on watching anyone die tonight." His breath hitched, like he understood me. When I touched his fur, warmth surged through me. Not just heat, but something alive, pulsing under my skin. It was like touching lightning that didn't burn. My fingers tingled, my heart stumbled, and for a fleeting moment, I swore the forest held its breath with me. I gritted my teeth, grasped the arrow and pulled. He let out a sound, half snarl, half scream, that cut through the storm like thunder. My lantern flickered out. I fell backward, my hands slick with his blood. But he didn't attack. He collapsed forward, pressing his muzzle weakly against the ground, body shuddering. "I'm sorry," I gasped, crawling back to his side. I tore strips from my cloak, pressing them to the wound. My herbs were soaked, useless, but I whispered every healing prayer I knew. Words my mother used to murmur when she stitched wounds that refused to close. And then, something impossible happened. The bleeding slowed. The torn flesh began to knit itself together under my hands. Not perfectly, but enough. My breath caught. The wolf trembled, his golden eyes flickering between pain and something else. Recognition, maybe. I looked at my blood-coated palms, then at him. "What are you?" I whispered. He closed his eyes. The rain eased to a whisper. And for a moment, the world went still. By dawn, the storm had passed. The wolf was still alive. Barely. I couldn't leave him out there, not with the scent of blood attracting every predator in miles. So with all the strength I could muster, I dragged him, inch by inch, through the forest toward the abandoned hunter's cabin I sometimes used for gathering herbs. The cabin groaned as I pushed the door open. It smelled like damp wood and dust, but it was shelter. I laid him down near the hearth and covered him with the thickest blanket I owned. For hours, I cleaned and dressed his wound, whispering things like, "You're stubborn," and "Don't die on me." Talking to him made it easier to ignore the fear that had started curling in my stomach, because wolves didn't heal like that. Not even wild alphas. When I finally sat back, exhausted, the wolf's breathing was steady. I let myself relax for the first time in hours. My body slumped against the wall, and before I knew it, sleep claimed me. I don't know what woke me. The silence, maybe. Or the faint shift of air beside me. But when I opened my eyes, the blanket on the floor was empty. My heart dropped. Before panic could take over, a sound behind me froze my blood. Wood creaked. Slowly, I turned my head, and my breath caught in my throat. A man stood there. He was tall, impossibly so, shoulders broad enough to block the morning light spilling through the window. His hair was black, damp, clinging to a face carved with something between beauty and danger. His bare chest was streaked with dried blood, but the wound that should have killed him was gone, completely gone. I scrambled backward. Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. His golden eyes found me, the same eyes I'd seen on the wolf. My heart stuttered. "You shouldn't have saved me," he said finally, his voice low, rough, and far too calm for someone who'd nearly died. My throat tightened. "You were bleeding to death." He tilted his head, studying me like I was the strangest thing he'd ever seen. "And now you've bound yourself to it? What?" He took a slow step closer, and I swore the air thickened around him. "You touched my blood," he said, eyes glinting. "You healed me with your hands. That means the bond recognizes you." "Bond?" I repeated, heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about." He smiled, dark, humorless. "Of course you don't." He was close now, close enough for me to see the faint shimmer of veins beneath his skin, like molten gold beneath marble. I'd never seen anyone like him, half danger, half something divine. "What are you?" I whispered again. He leaned in, so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." For a moment, something flickered in his expression, a mix of pain and pride. Then he said quietly, "I'm not just a wolf." His gaze locked with mine, unyielding. "I'm the Alpha King." The words hit like a thunderclap. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to keep up. "That's impossible. The Alpha King, he's a myth. Do I look like a myth to you?" He wasn't wrong. His presence alone made the air hum, made my pulse stutter like I was standing too close to lightning. "I don't understand," I whispered. "If you're the Alpha King, why were you bleeding out in my forest?" His jaw clenched. "Because someone I trusted decided my crown looked better drenched in blood." For a heartbeat, something raw flashed in his eyes. Betrayal, grief, fury all at once. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold calm. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said. "Now you're part of something you can't escape." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "You're welcome, by the way." For the briefest second I saw it, a flicker of surprise. Then, against all logic, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're either brave," he murmured, "or incredibly foolish." "Maybe both." He chuckled softly, the sound low and dangerous. "Then perhaps you'll survive what's coming." "What is coming?" His expression darkened. "War. And the moment they scent you've touched me, they'll come for you too." That night, when he finally slept, if sleep was even the right word for whatever restless stillness claimed him, I sat by the fire, watching the flames dance across his features. He looked peaceful, almost human. But I'd seen him shift. I'd felt the raw, untamed power under my hands, and as the wind howled outside, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of monster bleeds like a man but heals like a god? What kind of fate had I invited into my life when I chose to save a dying wolf? By morning, the storm had wrung the forest dry and left it raw. Sunlight came in spare, reluctant bands through the cabin's warped window, striping the floorboards like a cage. I sat cross-legged by the hearth with my mortar and pestle, pretending my hands weren't shaking. The herbs rasped against stone. The sound was steadying. Familiar. Nothing else was. He slept. If that slow poised stillness could be called sleep. His body lay near the fire, a blanket slung low around his hips. The wound I had closed with nothing but prayer and will was a pale seam now, as if the night had imagined it. Every breath he drew seemed measured. He had told me what he was. I had pretended not to believe him. A convenient lie I wrapped around my ribs like cloth. I added willow bark to the mix, then thyme and a pinch of crumbled angelica. The scent rose, bitter and clean. Tea for pain. Tea for anything I could name as human. Behind me, the floorboard creaked. "You grind too aggressively," he said, voice a low scrape, awake, watchful. "You'll bruise the oils bitter," I stiffened. "You're supposed to be resting. And miss your war with the herbs." A pause. Lyra. My name in his mouth did something to me I didn't approve of. It sounded heavier there, marked. I swallowed and scooped the mixture into a cup, adding water from the kettle. "Drink," I said, standing and crossing to him. "Complaints will be ignored." He took the cup without touching my fingers. Even that restraint felt intimate. "You have a temper. You have a wound." "Had," he corrected, mouth faintly curved. Then he lifted the cup, sniffed, drank. His eyes, wolf gold, molten at the edges, didn't leave my face. "You did something last night," he said after a swallow. "Something more than stitches and prayers." "I stopped the bleeding," I replied, focusing on the cup, on his throat moving as he drank. He tipped his head in that way predators do when they humor prey. "And you felt it." I looked up. "Felt what?" His gaze lowered to my hands. "The heat. Like copper through your veins. The prickle down your spine. The room narrowing to a breath. You felt it." I did. I hated that he could see it on me. "It was an illusion," I said. "Shock." "In my tongue," he murmured. "We call it the answering." "Answering what?" He didn't answer. He drained the cup. When he reached out to pass it back, his knuckles brushed mine, an accident so precise it felt like intention. Heat leapt up my arm. I gasped before I could stop it. His mouth shaped the ghost of a smile. "Answering that?" I stepped back like I'd been burned. My shoulder hit the hearth. "I saved your life." "That doesn't make me yours." Something dark slipped behind his eyes. Not anger. Something colder, a shadow taking shape. "I didn't say you were." He stood, the blanket shifting, the line of his body too elegant to be safe. "But you touched my blood. That binds. It's old law." "I don't recognize your laws," I said, even as the air seemed to thicken between us, dense with unsaid things. "I don't need you to recognize them." He looked toward the window, toward the slice of forest beyond. The world glinted on his skin like a warning. "Others will." "Others," I repeated. "The men who shot me," he said, calm as frost. "And the pack that decided a crown should be carried by a hand that doesn't tremble, even while it stabs." "You said a friend betrayed you," I murmured. He turned back, and for a breath I saw the grief cleanly on his face, uncloaked. "Brother," he said. "By oath, not blood," which means the oath was thinner. I had no language for that wound. I only had stitches and tease in the way my own chest ached with a sympathy I hadn't given permission to grow. "Tell me your name," I said, because I needed something to hold. Not titles. A name. He considered me, and somehow the cabin felt smaller, as if the decision itself carried gravity. "Cael," he said at last. Among my people, my mother whispered it first. Cael. It fit the bones of him, hard at the edges, clean in the middle. I said it once, quietly as if tasting it would prove it real. "Cael." The corner of his mouth softened. Not a smile, just recognition. He bent, picked up the shirt I'd draped over a chair to dry. As he drew it on, I watched the play of muscle across his shoulders and hated myself a little for watching. The fabric clung damply, then took his heat and smoothed. "How far is your village?" he asked. "Far enough," I said automatically. Then, because the safety you lie about is the first safety you lose. "Half a day if you know the paths." "A day if you don't. Do they know of you?" he asked. "Your gift." "It isn't a gift," I said. "It's stubbornness." "And your mother?" "She had a steadier touch," I said. the words coming out before I could stop them. And kinder eyes. She'd have scolded me for dragging a wolf twice my size through the forest and said, "You can't fix the world. Little bird." Then she would have helped me do it anyway. She's gone. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He glanced at the door, then back to me. "I won't endanger what you have left." "You already have," I said, surprising myself with the sharpness in it. "But I won't throw a bleeding man back into the dark to soothe my fear. Even if the bleeding has stopped. Careful," he said softly. "Mercy makes a fine blade. It cuts forward and back." I might have asked what that meant, if the world hadn't answered for him. The sound came from the trees, a crack of branch. Then the soft, sure tread of men who think the forest owes them a debt. Cael's head snapped toward the noise. In one motion, the blanket was gone, the shirt done, the cabin suddenly too bright for hiding. "How many?" I whispered. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, listening with something beneath the human. "3," he said. "No, 4. One hangs back." "Hunters?" "Not mine." A pause. "Not yours either." I moved without thinking, snuffing the lantern, dragging the iron bar across the door. The cabin darkened to a hush. Sunlight became a spill on the floor. My heart thudded deliberately, as if it wanted to be heard. Cael's voice was a breath at my ear. I hadn't heard him cross the room. "Under the hearth," he said. "What?" "Lift the 3rd stone." I crouched, found it, old ash smearing my fingers, pulled. The stone gave with a tired sigh, a hollow. In it, a knife wrapped in oiled cloth. "You knew about this," I said. "I remember what others forget," he replied. "Keep it. I don't keep it," he repeated, steel under silk. Footsteps circled the cabin. A hand slid over wood. The latch tested, once, twice. Then a gentle knock like a joke told too quietly. "Miss?" A voice, sweet as a merchant's. "We found sign of a wounded animal. Thought to warn you. Blood draws worse than wolves." I stayed still. The knife was slick in my hand, my palms damp. I didn't answer. The voice tried again, still polite. "We're only here to help. Open up." Cael's eyes met mine in the shadow. He shook his head once, no. The knock became a fist. Open. I don't know which part of me said yes to fear, the human or the healer. But I stepped toward the door, fingers on the iron, when Cael's hand closed around my wrist. Brief, containing. "Don't," he breathed. Something moved in me, the way a river changes course under ice. I nodded. Silence fell outside, sudden and total. Even the birds seemed to fold their voices away. Then wood groaned, low and early, as if it remembered how to break. The door didn't shatter. It opened. The iron bar snapped in the middle with a sound like a spine giving way. The man in the doorway smiled at the ruin he made, admiration at his own strength. "Hello," he said, stepping over the threshold as if it had invited him. He was tall in a way that wanted to be noticed. Blonde hair swept back, smile practiced, eyes too bright. Behind him, 3 men fanned out, their faces a study in dull hunger. The 4th, the one who had hung back, remained a suggestion among the trees. "You're trespassing," I said, "because the script of courage is sometimes the only thing between you and panic." The blonde man put a hand to his chest, wounded. "Trespassing? Unkindness?" He looked around like the room were a stage. "You must be Lyra." My name in his mouth was a fingerprint I wanted to scrub away. "We're not taking visitors." "Forgive me," he said, "but we have visited anyway." His gaze drifted past me, slow and savoring, as if the air itself had a taste. I shifted to block his view, even though I knew Cael had already become shadow. "State your business," I said. "Business," he repeated, rolling it, then letting it fall. "A particular wolf ran this way, large, black, bleeding. He's valuable to us. We're retrieving what's ours." "He isn't here," I said. "Are you sure?" His smile sharpened. "Or are you lying to me because your hands still smell like his blood?" Cael's presence at my back changed. Stillness turned to draw. He stepped out of the corner like a knife comes out of a sheath. No hurry, all promise. The man's smile left, briefly, then returned too quickly. "There you are," he said. We were worried you might die. Try harder, Cael said. Alpha, the man crooned, mocking the syllables. King. What title are you using now that titles seem to slip? I don't wear titles to make you comfortable, Marek, Cael said, and the name fell between them like a thrown stone. Marek's mask cracked enough to show the teeth beneath. You should have bled longer. You should have chosen a lighter step, Cael replied, gaze flicking to the door as if he could see the absent fourth man. You always did like to watch from behind. The two of them looked at each other like men do across a battlefield, all speaking done before words begin. The air tightened. Time drew its knees to its chest. Take him, Marek said without raising his voice. They moved, 2, then 3. Like the idea of his command had always been inside their bodies waiting to be said. I didn't think. I acted. The knife was already up when the first man reached me. I slashed. He recoiled with a startled curse. Blood beaded along his forearm, bright against dirt. Surprise, more than pain, opened his eyes wide. He didn't roar it. He whispered it, and the whisper hit the room like thunder. He moved then, and the shape of him changed. Not fully, no fur, no muzzle, but something primal slipped into his bones, lengthening, crowding the human. When his hand closed on the second man's throat, claw tips had replaced fingernails. He lifted him and put him through the table as if the wood had asked to be broken. The third swung a cudgel. Cael caught it, twisted, and the man screamed as bone popped out of place. Marek watched, head tilted, amused, annoyed, measuring. I lunged toward the window, grabbing for the jar beside it, the one with the powder I'd ground last winter for fevers that refused to break. Ash leaf, dried and bitter, mixed with crushed pepper root. Not poison, but not pleasant. I threw it into the air like a handful of bees. It burst in a gray sting. The first man, the one I'd cut, inhaled and retched. His eyes watered, his mouth opened. He dropped his knife to clutch his face. Cael glanced at me, fast, bright, acknowledgement flashing like sunlight off steel. Then he ducked as Marek moved for the first time, not toward me or the door, but toward the hearth. He isn't here to fight, something in me realized. He's here to mark. Marek's hand plunged into the fire. Not into the flames, into the ash banked beneath, seeking. He pulled something free. A brand, long and iron, its head the shape of a crescent chained to a crown. He held it up. The tip glowed, ember red. Sign of claim, he said cheerfully, as if we were discussing a festival. We don't need your body, Cael. We just need your name burned on the right walls. Cael was on him in the next breath. The brand clanged against the hearth and rolled, hissing, leaving a smoking arc across the floorboards. Marek met Cael's lunge with the lazy precision of someone who had survived long enough to be bored by survival. Their hands closed around each other's wrists, forearms corded with effort, faces close. Cael's teeth bared. Marek's smile thinned to a scythe. I went for the brand. It was instinct, not courage. The iron burned through my skirt at a touch, scorching the fabric. I caught the cooler end with the hem and dragged it out of reach. The heat soaked through, licked my palm even through cloth. The room smelled like singed wool and old ash. Lyra, Cael said, without looking, voice cutting from the center of the struggle. Run! No, I said, and heard how small the word was. How wide? Marek's brow lifted, interest peaked. Lyra, he repeated, savoring it. Now I know your name, little healer. Names are keys. He shoved, and for a fraction of a second he slipped free of Cael's hold. His arm snapped out and caught me across the cheek with the back of his hand. It wasn't fear that I tasted then. It was copper and heat, and a memory of my mother's voice. You can't fix the world, little bird, but you can make it regret biting you. The knife in my hand found Marek's ribs. Not deep. His reflexes were too fast, his body too unwilling to bleed. But enough. He hissed, not at the pain but at the fact of it. He glanced down at the red welling against his shirt, then back at me. Something delighted flared in his eyes. There you are, he said. I wondered. Whatever he wondered ended with Cael's shoulder driving into his sternum. They crashed into the doorframe, wood splintering. The two men who could still move hauled their injured brother up and shoved toward the gap beside the hinge. dragging Marek free as Cael reached for him again. "Withdraw," Marek said, laughing, blood on his lips like a confession he enjoyed. "Withdraw, withdraw." He was already backing through the doorway when he added, almost gently, "You've made it interesting, little healer. I do love a story that refuses to end when I tell it to." Then he was gone, swallowed by the forest, his men with him. Only the fourth lingered on the threshold, just a shape, just a held breath, before even that unmade itself, and the trees took back their quiet. Silence dropped so hard the room rang. Cael didn't move for a heartbeat. His chest lifted, fell. A thin line of blood trickled from a cut at his temple, traced his jaw, fell to the floor with a sound I felt more than heard. He looked at me. His eyes were not human now. Not fully. They had narrowed to the gold of a raptor in a high wind. I realized I was still holding the brand. My palms throbbed. I dropped it, and it sang when it hit the floor, a wrong bell. He crossed to me in 3 long strides. His hands hovered over my face, not touching. "Where are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, reflex, habit. Then the room tilted a fraction to the left. "Not entirely." He was careful when he cupped my cheek, turning my face toward the light. His thumb found the swelling near my mouth. Heat gathered there under skin. "You'll bruise," he said, voice too soft to be safe. "I've had worse." The words tasted braver than they felt. "You bleed beautiful," I added before I could stop myself. He blinked. Then, impossibly, laughed, low and surprised, the sound breaking on something real. "That's a strange comfort. I'm not talented with comfort," I said, "only with the bits that come before and after." He stepped back, as if distance might slow whatever it was that had begun to run between us. "He knows your name. He knows I won't open my door," I said. "Perhaps that's enough." "No," Cael said. "He'll use it. Names bind. Gifts answer. He'll wonder what you did to close a wound meant to end me, and what that makes you." "What does it make me?" I asked. His gaze slid, caught, returned. "Visible." I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to remember how to be small. It didn't work. The air still remembered my name too loudly. "If he's your enemy, why does he want a brand on walls?" "Because walls listen," Cael said. "Because fear needs writing to convince the ones who are too stubborn to hear it. He wants to mark this place as mine so he can call my allies to burn it or my enemies to claim it. Confusion is a war's best friend. And he wants you alive. For now." Cael's mouth was a line cut into stone. "He wants to parade me. Or try what others have tried. Bind me to a leash thick as a crown." I wanted to ask what others. I wanted to ask how you leash a storm. Instead, I crossed to the basin, poured water, wrung a cloth, pressed it to my cheek. Cold sang up into heat. Pain softened to a throb. "What now?" I asked, and I tried to make it sound practical. "Just a problem to solve. Not a life rewriting itself." "Now," he said, "we make choices. The kind that don't feel like choices because all the options are knives. Say them." He looked at the broken door, the ash swept across the floor, the brand cooling to an ugly iron moon. "I leave," he said first, as if it were a fact he'd measured and found barely tolerable. "I draw them off you. I make the forest remember how fast I can run. And if they catch you?" I asked. "They won't. But if they do?" "Then," he said, and the word stripped clean, "they learn the cost of trying." "And my village?" I asked. "If you leave, they'll still come. They'll still find me." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "The other option," I said, when the silence began to stitch itself into something tighter, "is that I go with you." His head snapped toward me. He didn't reach for me. He reached for the idea and tried to break it before it set. "No. Yes. You don't know what I'm walking toward." "War," I said. "You told me." "And what are you walking from?" He countered. "A life. A home. Mercy turned into blade and cutting back toward you." "My life was already cutting," I said. "I was just bleeding quietly enough no one heard." I set the cloth down. My hand shook. I made it still. "I won't bring a storm to my door and pretend I didn't invite it." "It isn't you they sent," he said gently. Almost mourning. "It is now." We stood in the hush of the ruined morning, two people who had been strangers a night ago, tangled in a net of names and laws older than the words we'd used for them. "You can leave when you're ready," I said finally. "I won't stop you. But don't ask me to be less brave than I accidentally became." He looked at me the way a man looks at the first peak after too many valleys, measuring whether his legs remember how to climb. "You're not brave because you don't fear," he said. "You're brave because you can name what you'll lose." "And you?" I asked. "What will you lose?" He smiled then, small, private. Perhaps the illusion that I ever held anything that couldn't be taken. I moved to the cupboard and began packing what I would have mocked myself for packing yesterday. Bandages, tinctures, dried meat, a bundle of rags that weren't pretty but stayed clean. My hands had purpose. My heart borrowed steadiness from them. He watched me as if the sight hurt him and steadied him in equal measure. 3 hours, he said finally. "We move when the shadows lengthen. The air will hold our scent less." "You plan that far down to the leaves?" I asked, trying for lightness. It came out like breath after running. "I've had to." "Then tell me everything I need to know to not die." He came to the table, righted what was left of a chair, sat, and made a map of the forest with words, where the gullies ran like old scars, where the ridge cracked open to show the throat of the mountain, where the creek braided into silence under cliffs that loved to throw back sound like laughter. He handed me a cord of leather with 4 knots. "If we're separated," he said, touching each knot, "north, east, south, west. Feel the moss on the left side of the trunks. It's a liar this time of year. The wind comes crooked." "Are you always like this?" I asked. "All directions and warnings?" "Only on days that end," he said. "And begin," we worked. We righted. We burned what needed to leave no trace. When I wrapped my scalded palm, he reached to help. I pulled away. He let me. When he cleaned the blood I'd smeared across the floor, I didn't thank him. But my body unclenched a fraction at the sight. Afternoon tilted toward evening. The light went gold, then ash. The forest drew its breath in. We stood at the threshold, the ruins of a door making a door of its own out of absence. The path outside ran like a vein into the trees. The last birds were saying last things. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I said. "Yes," he offered his hand. Not as a command, not as a claim, as an invitation written in muscle and bone. I didn't take it. I stepped forward and stood beside him instead. Our shoulders almost touched. The space between us felt like a word I hadn't learned yet. Maybe I never would. "Lyra," he said, looking ahead into the green dark. "When we reach the ridge, there is a law." "Another one," I muttered. "The old ones," he said, and for the first time, reverence threaded his voice. "You do not speak your true name under the witness of the white pines. They keep what they hear, for years, forevers. Then what do I say when you ask who I am?" I asked. He glanced at me, the hint of something like amusement in his eyes. "Lie," he said, "and tell me the truth in your pulse instead." We stepped into the trees. The forest folded around us with a sound like pages closing. My home became space. My future slotted its teeth. Behind us, the cabin settled. Relieved or grieving, I couldn't tell. Ahead, the path narrowed, then opened, then narrowed again, as if reminding us that what we walked would change us and ask to be changed in return. We moved in silence a while. My breath found a rhythm that wasn't panic. The smells of the world grew distinct again. Wet bark, crushed fern, the faint sweet of last season's berries softening underfoot. Beside me, Cael moved with an economy that stole nothing from the forest and took everything he needed. When he spoke, his voice was the shape of the shadows. "Marek won't come directly again," he said. "He'll send rumor and scent. He'll turn trees into mouths. He'll wonder why the wound closed." "Because I closed it," I said. "Because the answering did." He corrected gently. "Then tell me what it answered." He was quiet for 3 steps. 4. "Power moves toward its equal," he said at last. "When blood calls, the world replies through the nearest throat brave enough to answer. You were nearest. You were brave." "Or foolish," I said. "Those are neighbors," he admitted. We crested a small rise. The white pines stood ahead, their needles pale as if moonlight had fallen and decided not to leave. The air under them felt colder, the ground older. I stopped without meaning to. Cael inclined his head to them as one does to an elder who remembers your first, worst secrets. He didn't speak. Neither did I. A wind moved through, combing the pine's high hair. The sound it made wasn't quite a voice, but it wasn't not. I looked at Cael. He looked ahead. We stepped into the circle of their keeping. Something in me accepted then, what I had been refusing since the night drew me out like a thread. I had left my life, and it had not followed. Not fully, not in the way that mattered. It might again. It might never. Lyra, Cael said softly, as if he could feel the thought break in me like thin ice. If you want to turn back, do it now. I looked past him. The path behind us had already rewritten itself into a rumor. The path ahead wrote itself as we walked. I don't turn back, I said. I just learned to be a different shape. He exhaled, something that might have been relief or resignation or both. Then keep close, he said. And when we moved again, our shoulders brushed, the light thinned to blue. The pine's shadows lengthened like old stories. Far off, a wolf called, one note, clean. Not a question. Not an answer. A promise. Cael lifted his head and listened with his whole body. What does it say? I whispered. His eyes met mine, gold gone dark. It says we're not alone. I didn't ask whether that was comfort or warning. The forest would decide, we went on. And if the world felt like it had chosen us for a story we didn't know the end of, then perhaps that was the only true beginning I had ever been given. The path narrowed until it was little more than a rumor between the trees. Every step sank into moss that swallowed sound. Somewhere above, crows moved like thoughts, dark and deliberate. Cael led, though he didn't look back to check if I followed. He didn't need to. The forest itself seemed to know where we were supposed to go. Roots folding out of our way, ferns sighing open under our steps. By midday, I had stopped pretending I wasn't watching him. The way he walked was unlike any man I'd ever seen. His body alert even in rest, like every muscle had learned to listen. Once, when the light shifted through the canopy, I caught gold flaring in his eyes again. Wolf watching through human shape. Does it hurt? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't turn. Does what hurt? The change. Only if I fight it, he said. The pain comes from pretending to be one thing when you're both. I didn't answer. The words were too close to something I didn't want to name. We stopped near a stream that ran clear and cold over white stones. I knelt to drink, cupping the water in my hands. When I looked up, he was watching the sky through the trees, his jaw set like he was listening to something distant. They're close, he murmured. Marek's men. He shook his head. No, wolves, not mine. Scouts, maybe. Rogues. Are they dangerous? All things are, when they're hungry. I felt the air shift then, the forest tightening around us. Like it, too, had heard the approach. My heartbeat stuttered. The stream kept its song, but underneath it came another sound. Light, fast, circling. Cael straightened, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of the blade he carried now. Stay behind me, he said. 3 wolves broke through the undergrowth, lean and gray, eyes sharp with suspicion. They didn't attack, not yet. They prowled the edge of the clearing, heads low, tails stiff. The largest of them stepped forward, growling low. Cael growled back. It wasn't human, not a word, not a sound I could translate. It was power meeting power, old and commanding. The gray wolf flinched first, ears flattening. What did you say to them? I whispered when the pack finally turned and melted back into the shadows. That I'm not prey, he said simply, and neither are you. We walked until evening. The sky bruised purple and gold, the air heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Cael stopped by a ridge where stone rose from the earth like broken teeth. This will do, he said, setting down his pack. We'll rest here until night. I gathered sticks, though my hands trembled too much to be of much use. When he struck flint to spark the fire, I saw his profile in the glow, sharp and weary, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. How long will they hunt you? I asked. He stared into the flame. Until I make them remember why they shouldn't. The answer was simple, but it carried the weight of centuries. I hesitated, then said quietly, "You could have left me behind." "I could have," he said. "But the bond wouldn't let me." "Bond," I repeated. "You keep saying that. What is it, truly?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something raw in his expression. Fear, maybe, or longing so deep it looked like pain. "When two forces touch that shouldn't," he said, "the world decides whether to destroy them or weave them together. You healed me with your blood on your hands. Now my power knows your scent. My soul remembers your voice." "That sounds like a curse." "It is," he said softly, "and a promise." The rain began just after midnight. We moved inside the shallow cave behind the ridge, the fire hissing low. The damp air clung to everything, skin, breath, silence. I sat against the stone wall, knees to my chest, trying to ignore the thunder that rolled across the mountains. Cael sat a few feet away, eyes closed, breathing steady. He looked carved from the dark itself, every line of him molded by survival. "Do you ever sleep?" I asked. "When I forget what I've lost," he said without opening his eyes. "And how often does that happen?" He smiled faintly. "Almost never." I looked at the flames, then at him. "You said you were betrayed. Why?" "Because I refused to be a weapon for men who call themselves gods," he said. "Because I wanted peace in a world that worships blood." "And Marek?" "He wanted power. My crown, my death, whichever came first." He opened his eyes and they met mine. "You shouldn't have seen any of this. My world devours mercy. Then it will choke on me," I said before I could stop myself. He stared for a long moment, then whispered, almost to himself, "You keep saying things that sound like vows." I didn't answer. The storm outside howled At some point, I must have drifted into a shallow sleep. The fire had burned low, and the night pressed close. When I woke, I wasn't sure why, until I realized Cael wasn't where he had been. A faint light pulsed near the mouth of the cave, soft, golden, unnatural. I rose quietly and stepped closer. He stood outside in the rain, shirtless again, the glow coming from his skin, lines of light running beneath it like rivers of molten gold. His head was bowed, hands clenched, rain hissing as it hit him. "Cael?" I whispered. He turned sharply. For an instant his eyes blazed, more wolf than man, more god than either. The light pulsed once, then dimmed. "You shouldn't see this," he said. "What is it?" "The bond," he murmured. "It reacts when I lose control. He stopped himself, looking away. "When I remember." I took a step closer despite the warning in his voice. "Does it hurt?" He laughed softly, bitterly. "Everything that matters does." Rain soaked through my cloak, but I didn't move. He stood before me like something ancient and wounded, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I reached out. The moment my fingertips brushed his arm, the light steadied. Warmth surged through me, fierce and gentle all at once. His breath caught. "So did mine, Lyra," he said quietly, my name breaking like prayer. I wanted to pull back, but couldn't. The world felt like it had narrowed to that single heartbeat. The rain, the touch, the gold between us. Then he stepped back, severing it. The light vanished. Only the rain remained. "You shouldn't follow me again," he said, voice low. "If I lose control, I can't promise I'll remember which part of me is human." "And if I don't follow, you'll die," I said. He looked at me then, really looked, and whatever he saw made him flinch. "You're not afraid of me." "No," I said honestly. "But maybe I should be." His jaw clenched. "You should." "Then teach me how," I said. He didn't reply. He turned away, rain gleaming on his skin like the memory of light. When he finally spoke, it was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Sleep while you can, Lyra. Tomorrow, the forest stops watching and starts hunting." Dawn didn't arrive so much as it bled, thin and gray through the tree line. The forest rinsed in a color that made truth look ill. My cheek throbbed in a patient rhythm beneath the swelling where Marek's hand had found me. My palm, wrapped and useless, reminded me of the brand I'd dragged across the floor. Every ache was a ledger entry. The morning read me like a debt. Cael was already awake. He stood at the mouth of the cave, both man and warning, his hair damp with night. The rain had moved on, but its memory clung to everything. Stone, moss, the slow drip that counted seconds into a puddle near my boot. "Eat," he said without turning. He passed me a strip of dried meat and a slice of last night's stubborn bread. I chewed because survival requires vulgar things like food even when your chest is too crowded to swallow. "We move north," he said, eyes still scanning the trees. "The ridge bends there, and the creek forgets its name in a sink of limestone. Scent dies in stone, and if they're already north, then we go through them." He finally looked back. "You stay behind me. You do not call my name. If I change, you do not reach for me unless I speak to you. And if you don't speak..." He considered that, a line pinched between his brows that made him look less like a king and more like a man who'd learned too late what it cost to keep breathing. "Then you run," he said. I nodded and lied to both of us. "I'll run." We left the cave without ceremony. The forest received us like a rumor it planned to deny if questioned. Morning noises resumed. Crows haggling, a far woodpecker counting in stubborn knocks, the fidget of small things in underbrush. The white pines gave way to taller, gloomier firs that turned the light to green glass. Our breath plumed and then disappeared, taken into the quivering air. We moved single file, his stride measured into mine. Each of his steps felt placed for both of us. Once he lifted a palm without looking, and I stopped. A root yawning across the path like the back of something sleeping. Beyond it, the ground steepened, slick with old needles. He offered a hand and didn't seem to notice when I didn't take it. Or perhaps he noticed everything, and mistook none of it for refusal. The creek found us the way sorrow does. Quietly, then suddenly everywhere. It ran clear, surface trembling as if it had been listening long enough to be afraid of what it heard. Cael knelt and dipped his fingers, lifted them to his nose and then his tongue like a wolf translating a paragraph from water. "3 passed here not long ago," he murmured. "Light, fast, scouts, not hunters. Marek?" "No," he said. He moves with the arrogance of a loud song. "This is careful." He glanced up at the slope. "They're laying ears. What does that mean?" "Listening places." He pointed with his chin toward the far bank, a cluster of saplings stitched with pale gray strands. At first I thought them spider silk. Then the wind moved and the threads chimed faintly, a sound so thin it seemed imaginary. "Bone string," he said. "Fox knuckle cleaned and drilled. Hang it right and the forest speaks to you in quivers when something disturbs it." "Clever?" I said. "Cowardly," he corrected. "Clever comes after." He scanned the slope. "We'll go in the water." Step where I step, we entered the creek and the cold cut my breath to pieces. Stones shifted underfoot, small traders. Cael moved against the current like a fact. I moved like a question. Halfway across, he paused and lifted a finger. I stilled. The world did too, a low whistle, barely air, barely sound, unspooled from uphill. 2 notes, answered by 3. Not birds, not human, a code somewhere between. Cael's jaw tightened without moving. He sank lower, the water reaching his thigh. Fingers spread above the surface like he meant to calm it. When the first arrow skittered into the water, it didn't look like a threat. It bobbed, cheerful as drift. The second knocked against a stone by my boot and stuck, trembling. The third snapped the surface beside Cael's shoulder with a petulant hiss and went on, spent. "Down," he said. He didn't shout. He sank and I followed, the creek gulping up to my ribs. Cold flooded my bones. My teeth clicked a message I refused to translate. We crouched behind a tumble of stone, and the water's sound grew into a curtain. A hard white noise that could hide a life or end it. Another whistle. Closer. A shadow moved on the bank. Then became a man the way guilt becomes confession. Reluctantly, fully. He wore leather dyed dull as lichen, and had a hunter's patience, which is to say he suffered his own heartbeat. 2 more slipped behind him, one smaller, one limping. Their bows were unstrung. They weren't here to kill. "Echo men," Cael breathed. Marek's ear. "They see and scatter. Scatter how? Like seeds on tongues." He tipped his head to the bone strings. They mouth and the forest repeats. The first knelt, studying the creek like he suspected it of treachery. Cael shifted just enough to put his body between theirs and mine. The cold had sharpened his edges, or maybe it was the nearness of danger. He looked less clothed in humanity than wrapped in it. We waited. The hunters waited. The creek went on having the only honest voice. When the small one stepped too near the bank, and the earth caved to wet clay beneath him, he yelped and windmilled. The larger caught him by the collar, as if retrieving a scruffed pup. "Careful, Rill," the big one said with a laugh he regretted as soon as he made it. Laughing is loud. So is kindness. Cael moved. He rose from the water like a verdict, cold diamonds breaking from his arms. Before the big one could lift his hands from the small one's collar, Cael had him by the wrist and throat. Not crushing, owning, the second took a step back and froze with a noise he couldn't keep tidy. The limping one reached for a whistle he hadn't yet bitten. I threw a wet stone and it cracked against his knuckles, sending the whistle skittering into the creek. "Swallowed. If you call," Cael said to the man he held. "Your bones will be the string." The man's eyes bulged. He stopped moving, which is the first wise thing fear teaches. The small one, Rill, stared at me like I had grown teeth. I stared back like I hadn't. "We don't want trouble," the big one managed, voice squeezed into a thin new shape by Cael's grip. "We take sign, we pass word, we don't break." "You broke my door yesterday," I said, because some truths arrive late and still want saying. He flicked confusion at me, and it dissolved in fear before it could be anything. "Not us," he wheezed. "We don't—" "Doors." "Marek," Cael said, and the name made the air vein with pressure. "Where?" "East," the limper whispered, cradling his smarting hand. "He splits. He sent us north to see if the ridge takes breath. He goes east to make noise." "Noise," Cael repeated. "What kind?" "Fire," the limper said, and swallowed again, because the word ash-gray in a mouth at dawn is a kind of blasphemy. "He wants smoke, he wants people to look." "At what?" I asked. "At the crown," the big one said, as if it were obvious. "At the shape of it on walls." Cael's mouth turned sharper. He released the man's throat, but not his wrist. "You'll take us to your nest." "We don't nest. You do today." Rill looked between us with the large eyes of those who haven't been afforded time to make a childhood. "If we lead you," he said to me, not to Cael, "do we die?" "Not by my hand," I said. Rill looked at Cael. Cael's face was a closed gate. "Nor mine if you keep your mouths as you do your feet," he said. Quiet. We climbed out of the creek and into the forest's damp breath. The three moved ahead, oddly graceful for men who had just been frightened into obedience. Hunters are only clumsy when observed. When they become the observed, they remember how to be rumor. We went north, then west, then north again, threading ground that smelled of old storms and deer. Birdsong ceased as we entered a shallow bowl where the earth gathered itself as if preparing to leap. In the hollow's center lay a smaller cave mouth, brambled and mean. The big one stopped. "We go no farther without promise." "Promise," Cael said, tasting the word as if it were raw. "You didn't bring promise into the creek." "Different water," the man replied, stubborn in a way that made me like his survival. "Promise or I scatter and take the string with me." Cael looked at me. It didn't feel like he asked permission. It felt like he asked if he could accept the cost of asking. I nodded, small, stupid, necessary. He lifted his right hand, palm open, and pressed 2 fingers to his own throat. "By blood and breath," he said, the cadence old enough to make the trees lean closer. "You leave with your lives if you don't take mine." The man exhaled, a quiet collapse. Rill's shoulders dropped a fraction. The limper nodded as if he'd earned something he didn't want to spend. They led us into the cave and down a passage that wanted to be narrow but hadn't yet convinced stone. It opened into a low chamber warmed by breath and old fires, 4 bedrolls, a heap of bone string, cleaned and tied, a pile of smoked fish hung high where rats respected difficulty. The nest. I revised my earlier dislike of the word. Cael moved to the fish, cut 3 down, passed 1 to each of the hunters. "Eat," he said. "You'll walk faster on food." "We aren't walking with you," the limper said, and then remembered fear and corrected himself. We don't leave the nest when we're marked." "Marked how?" I asked. Rill lifted his hair to show the back of his neck. "A circle scar. No ink, no design. Just a pale ring where something had once declared its intention to own. I knew that sort of scar. Villagers wore them after the fever last winter from a healer's charm burned into skin with a silver coin. Protection takes the same shape as possession if you squint. Where's the mark made? Cael asked. Rill pointed to the low ceiling, to a dark seam in the stone. There's a hole above, he said. We climbed through to get in the first time. We bleed into the ring and it says, remember. Clever, I said again. Still cowardly, Cael murmured. He crouched by the heap of bone string and chose 3 lengths. He braided them with a speed that made me think of his hands moving along the page of a map only he could see. Bind your wrists, he told the hunters, and they obeyed without argument. He left knots loose. If Marek's dogs find you, you say we overpowered you and made you sing. If Marek finds you, you keep your mouths. He'll believe you survived because you were useful, not brave. He passed the limper a willow bark strip from my pouch, as if it were nothing, as if mercy were a habit, not a blade, for your hand, he added. The limper looked at the bark in surprise, then tucked it into his shirt like it was a relic. He'll go east, he said again, the news still urgent even after its saying. He'll light the crow pines. Their smoke runs black and far. It tells lies. What lies? I asked. That the Alpha King burns his own, the big one said. He stared at Cael like a man who has just realized the myth he's been following is an animal with teeth. That he's mad with the crown. That he brands what he wants and eats what he can't. Cael's mouth didn't move. His eyes did. It's a short road from lies to truth when the wrong mouths repeat it. Then we shouldn't let the wrong mouths have it, I said, and realized my voice had changed shape in the last day. The forest had sanded something down, sharpened something else. He stood. We won't. To the hunters, stay until dusk. Scatter west. Let the bone sing toward the river. Keep his noise crooked. What will you do? Rill asked. And I saw he was a boy after all, older than hunger, younger than fear. Cael looked at me. We go east. We left them there with their fish and their fear. The nest a small warm lie in a cold-blooded place. Outside, the light had climbed into noon and was already falling off the other side. The sun moves faster when you're being hunted. This is not metaphor. The day shortens to oblige. We cut southeast first to fool whatever ears the hunters hadn't claimed, and then swung east like a sudden thought. The air changed. It smelled of pitch and of something uglier, like pride gone to rot. Birds went silent not because of us, but because of a story traveling ahead. Marek's already there, Cael said. He lengthened his pace and I matched it, my lungs becoming knives I learned to swallow. The ground rose, fell, rose again. We crested the last low hill, and the world opened into a scar. The crow pines stood at the valley's center like a conspiracy. Black bark, blacker hearts. Their trunks were bound with iron hoops, and an old altar stone sulked before them, smeared with something that had once been red and still wanted to be. Men moved at the far edge of the clearing, small as guilt. 10, then 15, then more. At the center, Marek. He looked smaller from a distance. Lesser men do. The smoke was not yet lifted. Kindling lay teased around the pines like a dress someone planned to set alight. On the altar stone sat a brand such as the one Marek had lifted in my cabin, only larger, thrumming with an ugly intent. The crescent latched to a crown, the mark he wanted to write on the world. Not many, I whispered. No, Cael said too quickly. He pointed, and only then did I see the other shapes at the clearing's edge. Wolves, massive and low, their coats the gray of winter road slush. Not his. Their eyes had a churned look, like something had stirred their souls and not let the pieces settle. Broken pack, he said. Collared. He nodded to the iron bands at their throats, chains running back to posts with inscriptions I didn't want to translate. What does he want? I asked. To call me. Cael's lip lifted from his teeth. Not smile, not snarl, just the human's attempt to make a wolf's mouth. To force me to come and watch him make the sky lie. He squinted then, and the part of him that had been raised in a language older than fire read the scene as if it were a text. He has a singer. A what? A voice that moves minds. Not magic, music. Some men learn to lengthen air and shorten will. He pointed to a man standing on the altar stone with a long, thin horn. He'll sound, and the valley will carry his word like proof. Then we take his singer, I said. He looked at me with slow pleasure, as if something in me had spoken in his tongue without an accent. Yes, he said. We take his voice and break his throat, and the lie stays small enough to drown. How? We cut the chain, he said, and the simplicity of it felt like a prayer. Then we make enough noise of our own. He pulled me back from the rise, into cover that smelled of damp earth and old pine. He traced the clearing's edge in the dirt with his finger. We go here, he murmured, marking a low slope. You stay low. If I change, you close your eyes. Why? Because men forget they are men when they watch gods, he said. And I need you to remind me after. I wanted to ask when. I wanted to ask how I would know the moment he stopped being the shape I understood and began being the thing the world made to frighten itself at night. I didn't. I pressed my palm against his shoulder, brief, charged, a shared lightning. Don't give me orders you wouldn't obey, I said. His mouth tilted. I don't obey any orders, he said. Not even mine. We slid down, following a deer path that had outlived its deer. Wind shifted. Our scent lifted and moved sideways. Marek turned his head like a man who had heard a memory. We stilled. He smiled at the empty air and returned to his arrangements. At the slope's base, the ground opened into scrub. Cael pointed me toward a tangle of gorse and holly. Hide, he mouthed. I made myself smaller than the word hide and slid in among the thorns, their small insistences making maps on my skin. Cael moved left, then left again, until the shadows forgot to cast his shape. Marek stepped up onto the altar with his horn man. He lifted a hand and his wolves lay down, obedient and miserable. He set his palm against the nearest crow pine the way men touch the cheeks of their dead mothers. Possessive. Tender, false. Witness, he called, voice expanding without help yet. The natural amplification of arrogance. Witness the king who brands the trees that fed him. He lifted his own brand then, the iron ugly in the noon, and for a heartbeat my throat closed because I recognized the theater. He wasn't calling Cael. He was calling a crowd that wasn't present. Villages, rivals, memory. He would leave the pines charred and the rumor thick. The horn rose. It didn't sound. Cael had the singer by the ankle before air could become weapon. He yanked. The man went down with the astonished grace of those who believe the stage won't betray them. The horn clattered across stone like a frightened snake. Marek spun. Cael came up the altar as if he had always lived there. Hello, Marek said, as if running into an old friend at a market that sold wars. You came, you asked, Cael said. I'm trying kindness. He didn't wait for reply. He hit Marek the way rain hits roofs in flood, completely. The brand flew. The wolves surged. The chains bit their throats and yanked them down, snarls breaking into choked sounds that were worse for not being words. Men scrambled. Someone screamed. The clearing became an argument in many dialects of pain. I ran. This is the part I would later refuse when telling the story to myself in a bed that forgot me. I ran past the first man who reached for me and put the heel of my hand into his nose the way my mother taught me when drunk boys learned the shape of their courage. He went down. I went for the iron posts where the wolves were chained. Up close, the wolves were monstrous in a way that wasn't their fault. Their eyes rolled white, foam strung from their mouths, their bodies coiled with the desperation of strength asked to be leash. On the nearest post, a sigil had been carved into the iron, 3 lines incised into a circle. The cut had been rubbed with salt. Cruelty as craft, I drew my knife. My hand shook. I made it still. The chain's link was thick. The sigil glared. I am not your enemy, I told the wolf, which was a stupid thing to say unless anyone said it, and then it was everything. Hold, I said, and the word was as old as my blood. He held. I slipped the blade under the sigil, pried, felt the scrape cry up my arm. The iron sang a bad note and the circle cracked. The wolf sagged with the sudden slack like a man weeping in a private room. I cut through leather where chain bit flesh. Go, I said, and the wolf went like floodwater finding a lower town. Another post. Another sigil. Another bad song. My fingers groped for purchase, and found it in my own fear, which had become something with a spine. The second chain gave with a metallic spit. The wolf bolted. The third snarled when I came near, teeth bright as reasons. "Hush," I told him. "Be terrible out there, not here." I cut. He obeyed. A shout behind me, and the slice of air that means a blade is learning your name. I turned too late and met the man's swing with my wrapped palm. Pain ripped at my arm, white and feral. I stabbed by accident and virtue. The knife took him under the ribs. He folded in a confused sort of way, and I wanted to say, sorry, and didn't. At the altar, Cael and Marek had become a study in opposites. Marek moved like a man who had learned to choreograph lies and now insisted on their dance. Cael moved like weather, changing at angles men can't plan for. He hadn't shifted, all skin and sinew and the memory of fur, but the world treated him like a larger thing. Each step he took rearranged intention. He'd bleed tomorrow for the way he was unmaking himself today, but tomorrow had not been granted the right to speak here. The horn man crawled toward his instrument. I stomped its bell with my heel, felt it bend, heard a note of pain that didn't belong to an object. "No," I told him, and my voice had stone in it. He looked up at me and saw a woman who had run out of rooms to be good in. "Lyra," Cael's voice, the syllables a flare that located me as surely as a lighthouse shames fog. The warning arrived a breath before the wolf I'd freed leapt, not at me, not at Cael, but at the man aiming a crossbow at Cael's spine. The wolf's body hit the man's shoulders, and they went down in a noise that was itemized and brutal. I almost thanked the wolf, but gratitude is a soft thing inappropriate at certain altars. "Go," Marek shouted to his men, tastefully retreating toward the far trees. He wasn't running. He was repositioning in a way that flattered fear into thinking it had won. "Scatter," he called, and they did, leaving behind the noise, the mess, the way absolute conviction does when it discovers work. Cael lunged, caught the edge of Marek's cloak, and tore it. "He didn't get flesh." Marek laughed that light laugh that sounds like silver. "Later," he said, and slipped into the green like a rumor becoming a law. Silence collected its debts. Men groaned in a chorus that made an ugly hymn. The wolves panted, free and furious and unsure what to do with it. Cael stood on the altar stone, chest heaving, hands blooded in ways that weren't his. He turned slowly in a circle and took in what remained. When he looked at me, he looked at my hand first. My wrap had bled through, bright and vulgar. "You don't obey," he said, breath unsteady enough to make arrogance stumble. "Neither do you," I said. "But now the valley won't sing his lie." "Not with a horn," he agreed. He jerked his chin at the black pines, kindling scattered, unlit, and not with fire today. He bent, lifted the brand Marek had left like a bad thought. He balanced it in his palm, weighing its promise. "What are you doing?" I asked, returning the story to its owner. He turned and pressed the brand, but not to bark. To the altar stone, the iron hissed without flame, as if it still remembered heat. The mark took, crescent chain to crown, ugly and complete. He stood back, and in the wet noon light, the symbol looked small. Smaller than Marek wanted, small enough to go unnoticed by the sky. "He'll say you burned the trees anyway," I said. Let him choke on the absence." He dropped the brand and it clanged, a sound like doors closing. He looked at the wolves then, and, God help me, the king in him bowed to them, just a fraction. "You owe me nothing," he told them. "Do with your teeth what you wish." One of them, scar across one eye like a spilled moon, stepped forward and sniffed his hand. Then it turned and slipped into the trees, silent as a bad decision. The others followed, free without ceremony, which is the only kind worth having. My knees trembled and remembered how to act like knees. I sank to a rock and let my head fall into my good hand. The world took a long breath and then gave it back. Cael moved toward me and stopped as if a chain he respected had caught his ankle. He bent instead, wiped his hands in grass that had not asked to be an absolution, and came the last steps as a man. He knelt. He didn't touch me. "You disobeyed twice," he said, something like laughter wrecked in his voice. "You freed my enemies and broke a singer." "I freed your enemies from someone worse," I said. "And I broke a horn, not a man." He looked at the horn, bent and quiet. "That's kinder." "I'm not kind," I said. "Not today." He nodded as if I'd told him a prayer. "Good, we'll need that." We sat in the ugly aftermath together, which is a kind of intimacy more honest than most. The wind moved across the clearing and took nothing with it. Men groaned and began to crawl toward their lives, which now included answers they didn't want. "Do we go after him?" I asked, meaning Marek. "No," Cael said. "He wanted chase. We give him hunger instead. We starve his story and feed ours, and what is ours?" He looked at the pines, at the stone, at my hand, at the sky that had refused a lie. "That I am not the shape he draws me in ash," he said. "That you are not an accident." "I don't know what I am," I said, soft because the day had been sharp enough. "You're the answering," he said. And the question it chose. That should have frightened me. Perhaps it did, and I filed the fear for later. He rose and offered me his hand. I took it this time, and if heat traveled between us, it traveled like a truce. "Where now?" I asked as he pulled me up. "South," he said. "We circle to the falls. There's a gate there that isn't a door. We make for it before night remembers what night is." We began to move. The clearing fell behind us, the altar becoming a small scab on the land's skin. In the trees, the smell of pitch gave way to fern and wet rock and the honest sting of sap. The path turned and turned again. My hand throbbed. My cheek cooled. My heart did neither. "Lyra," he said after a time, when speech felt less like a risk. "You listened to me and then you didn't." His mouth tilted. "I should hate that." "You don't. I don't," he admitted. "It makes me less alone in my own disobedience." We climbed a narrow cut where the hillside had slipped seasons ago and never apologized. At the top, the world widened briefly, and I could see the line of the mountains holding up the sky like old men lifting a heavy table. I looked back toward the valley of the crow pines and imagined rumor trying to take root in ash that hadn't been allowed to be born. I wished myself the kind of woman who didn't stare too long at what she'd changed. As we descended, water found us again. The falls began as a murmur and built into a demand, the air turning mist-sweet. Cael pointed through the drift to a shadow where rock met rock in a geometry that wasn't accidental. "The gate," he said. "It's a crack," I said.